Hi, everyone. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you also to our panel experts who have carved out time from their busy schedules to share their insights with us today. My name is Gunn, and I'm the Director of Communications and Advocacy at YWCA Cambridge. Before we dive into this meeting, I would like to acknowledge that wherever we're all gathering from, we are all on traditional Indigenous territory. Some of which was never ceded and on which we are uninvited guests. For myself, I'm currently working from the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation of the Anishinaabe peoples, from whom this land was purchased by the British in 1784 as Upper Canada Treaty Number 3, 1792. It is known today as Guelph, and YWCA Cambridge is located on the unceded territory of the Haldimand Tract. This land was promised to the Haudenosaunee people of 6 nations. It includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. It is the territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee peoples. As for some housekeeping items before we really get things fired off, this session, as you probably already noticed, is being recorded. If you would like to use captions, you can find the option to turn on live captioning along the bottom of your Zoom screen. And please feel free to type any questions for the panelists into the Q&A box. We have allotted some time at the end for questions from attendees. And now, why are we here? It's a good question to start from. Actually, perhaps who we are is even better. So the YWCA Ontario Coalition is a coalition of YWCA member associations across Ontario. We're in large metropolitan areas like Toronto and northern rural areas like Sudbury. We offer a range of housing programs and services, including violence against women shelters, employment and training programs, community supports, childcare services, and youth programs, all designed to address the needs of women, girls, and gender diverse people and their families. We also engage in systemic advocacy to advance substantive gender and racial equity in our province. Combined, we serve more than 50,000 people every year across Ontario. And so we launched this campaign because, despite all orders of government declaring that the pandemic has brought on a She-cession, we have seen few tangible solutions for tackling it. Indeed, the She-cession was mentioned in area once during the federal election in September, and as a coalition, we decided we can't let the same be true for the provincial election. That's why we sent an open letter co-signed by activists and policy experts from across the province to the provincial government, as well as to all main provincial political parties. There's also an accompanying petition for this campaign that we strongly urge folks to sign on to. The link will be added to the chat. And we want to ensure the issue stays at the fore in the provincial election that is only 7 months away. What we're asking for is a plan. This plan must include investment in long-term, sustainable, gender-focused upskilling and training to help women access well-paying jobs, signing on to the federal child care plan to create a public and nonprofit-led, universal, high-quality, affordable childcare system, and enactment of standards for decent work conditions to improve labor and employment standards in feminized industries. And these are precisely the pieces we'll be discussing today with our panel of experts. In addition to raising public awareness and engagement, the YWCA Ontario Coalition has also begun meeting with provincial party platform committees to discuss the need for a feminist recovery, and we look forward to meeting with all the parties in the coming months. And of course, we will be staying on top of this issue in the coming months, so be sure to follow YWCA's on social media. Any YWCA folks who are present today are welcome to put their member association's social handles into the chat for folks, and I'll do the same for YWCA Cambridge. And of course, any other organization here who is doing advocacy around these issues or advocacy around any important issues impacting women and gender diverse individuals, please share your work here. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our esteemed moderator, Sarah Boesveld. She is the manager of advocacy at YWCA Toronto. You may have seen her byline in Chatelaine, the National Post, the Walrus, or a number of publications. Our gal is a prolific writer and journalist, and of course, an incredible advocate for gender equity. Our girl has also texted me to say she can't unmute herself, so I'm gonna see if I can do that. No, Sarah? Unplug your headset, maybe. No. You're actually on mute now. You weren't before. So unmute yourself. No, no one can hear you. Maybe leave and come back. We didn't have this problem before. No. Sarah, why don't you leave and come back and hopefully. I wonder, can you hear me? Okay, so everyone here can hear me. That's great. My audio is working. Sarah, I think, oh.
No, that's me, Roz.
Oh,
maybe you need to start the questions.
I think I might have to. That involves me finding them. Sarah, I think you should try to leave and come back. Okay, so I am going to try to pull up the bios while Sarah is figuring out. Armine has made it. That's wonderful. And just give me one. Sorry, folks. We even did a test run yesterday and early today, but technology is so unreliable. I'm just going to find, here we go. Okay. Bear with us, folks. Okay. How do the panelists feel? Oh, Sarah. Still no. Oh my goodness. Do you want to send me your speaking notes? This is peak pandemic indeed, Carolyn.
Do you want us just to introduce ourselves?
Yeah, panelists, right. Let's not, okay. Yeah, I don't want to eat any more of the time. So panelists, if you could introduce yourselves and don't be shy. You have sent us a bio. We really wanted to up you all. So please, if you have it in front of you, read your bio. We want folks to know just how incredible you are. We're going to start, I'll just start on the order that I see in my screen. Laura, would you like to go first?
Hi, everybody. I am Laura Sundy, and I am the Community Relations Director for YWCA Muskoka, and I live in Bracebridge. I don't have my bio open in front of me, but my background is in public relations and communications, and I spent a long time working at a PR agency in Toronto, and my husband and our family with 3 young kids moved up to Muskoka about 8 years ago now, and I have the privilege of working with women and girls and their families through YWCA Muskoka. And I'm really honored to be here today.
Thank you, Laura. Carolyn.
Hi, Carolyn Ferns. I'm the policy coordinator at the Ontario Coalition for Better Childcare. I've been with the OCBCC for about 6 years now, and I sit on the boards of directors of the Childcare Resource and Research Unit and the National Advocacy Association Childcare Now. So we're really happy to join everyone today and talk about the role that childcare can play with ending the She-cession in Ontario.
Thank you, Carolyn. And Medora Uppal.
Thanks, Roz. I am the Director of Operations for YWCA Hamilton. I've been with the organization and the movement for 10 years. I've been working in the not-for-profit sector in Hamilton for 24 years, born and raised in Hamilton, and very committed to a feminist, anti-racist, anti-oppressive work. And I'm glad to be here today. Thanks.
Thank you, Medora. Hi again, Sarah. I see you're connecting. Still muted. Okay, Armine Yalnizyan, would you please be so kind as to introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. Hi, thanks for inviting me. I am sitting on the shores of the Ottawa River, unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory, watching the river flow by, constantly reminded of what we get from the world around us and what we give to the world around us, of which the care economy is a huge part. I am an economist. I have been an economist for a very long time in a world that values money more than people and values growth more than taking care of one another. And I am thrilled, in part, the pandemic has permitted us to actually take a very hard look at what it is that makes the world go round. I guess the 3 things I'll tell you about my bona fides is that I'm still on the task force on women in the economy with the federal ministers, Freeland, who is the deputy prime minister, and Fortier, whose new portfolio I forget, sorry. I think she does public procurement. And I am writing a regular column for the Toronto Star now. And I do a lot of talking in the media because somehow I managed to do knowledge translation from economists to non-economists. So hopefully we'll get some of that today.
You do it so well, Armine, and I read your column today. Great piece in Toronto Star. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves, everyone. I think we'll send out the bios to everyone following this so that we can properly do justice to the brilliance that we have in this Zoom room right now. Sarah, I think you think your audio is working. So let's see if, yes, okay. So my colleague, Sarah Boesveld here from YWCA Toronto is going to moderate this panel. And you can take it away, Sarah.
Good Lord. Of course, my internet breaks when it's go time. So thank you everyone for your patience and for sticking with us. And thank you so much to this amazing, amazing panel for being here today. It's such an honor. I'm gonna just pin you all here so we can all talk together and just have a really engaging conversation, because that's what we're here today to do. This is the last day of our campaign, but it's not over yet, right? We've got this petition live still, and we're really just hoping to dive in and keep this conversation going. So thanks again. All right, I'm gonna start with you, Armine, and thank you for joining us. It's so cool to have the person who coined the term She-cession here to talk about the She-cession here in Ontario. So I think it's really important for us to start with what exactly it is. You know, when you coined that term in the beginning of all of this happening, when nobody made heads or tails of anything or could, what did you see happening? And also, what is the current status of the She-cession, especially here in Ontario?
Thanks for the question. And I love the, effectively the chyron underneath all of our faces, because it is now a couple of times done a religious thing. When, I can't remember who it was talking about their bio, it said they didn't have their Bible open in front of them. And now when you named me, I was called Amen. I accept. Amen. Can I hear an amen? I just think that it's cheesy that this portmanteau has caught on the way it did. I am an economist, being a woman and being an economist that has looked at labor economics for almost 40 years now. I was so outside the mainstream box of economics, thinking that the last thing I wanted to do was also pin the word feminist on me if I wanted to be taken seriously in the corridors of power. But this recession reversed everything about previous recessions. And if you watch labor markets, you'll know exactly why. In 2008, the New York Times dubbed the recession that followed the global financial crisis a he-cession. But every recession is a he-cession until this one. And what a he-cession is that men working in goods producing jobs, which is manufacturing, mining, oil and gas, lose their jobs first. Those jobs tend to be better paying. They don't come back very fast. And the first jobs that people pick up as the recovery begins are lower paid service jobs that tend to be female dominated. In other words, men lose the jobs, women start the beginning of the recovery by picking up the jobs. This recession turned everything on its head from the instigation, because what we were doing was stopping the economy deliberately. So anything that was considered non-essential got shut down to be able to contain the contagion. And it turns out that most of those non-essential businesses are female dominated and low wage dominated. So they're also dominated by racialized people, immigrants, young people, people with disabilities, people working part-time. That's what makes these jobs non-essential. It's that they're marginal businesses and they offer marginal standards of living. So women lost more of the jobs than men at the beginning. And then when the economy started reopening in the summer of 2020, the first jobs to come back were he jobs. They were the jobs in marinas and golf courses and car dealerships in Ontario, right? They were all he jobs. So 20 months into it, where are we at with the She-cession? Well, the job count, the head count of jobs is back to where we were in February of 2020. But meanwhile, the population has also grown. The underlying population has grown. So for us to be back at the employment rate of February 2020, we need about 250,000 more jobs. At the same time, jobs have grown in sectors like healthcare, education, and professional, scientific, and technical. Think IT, think anything to do with the internet, plus legal, plus accounting, plus all those things that you can do from home. Those jobs have grown, but a lot of the accommodation, the hospitality, the restaurants and bars, the small retailers, the personal services, those jobs have not as yet come back. So the head count is back, but the metrics that compare men and women show that women are still worse off. There's one metric that makes it look like women are better off, which is the average hours worked, but it's because the part-time jobs haven't come up. So when you cut part-time jobs out of the equation, total average hours work rise. So as these part-time jobs come back, expect to see women's average hours worked drop. This is a bit of a fictitious metric, but it's one that helps us understand, are people working more, are people working less in response to the pandemic. So yeah, we've got a head count of jobs back, but more people are working part-time. Consequently, the amount of hours to make the economy go round is not back to February 2020 levels. And women are putting in less of that because a lot of those marginalized industries, as the Canadian Federation of Independent Business would tell you, a lot of those businesses died. They just haven't held their funeral yet. So we don't know how much will come back. And part of that business sector that got hammered by pandemic economics, lower revenue, higher costs, is childcare, which in and of itself is a choke point for people being able to accept the work that's out there. So we have got like a kind of Russian nesting doll series of problems with getting back to so-called normal, and who the hell wants to get back to normal anyway after the
exactly
pandemic, right?
Exactly. And I'm so glad that you contextualize that, because there was a headline, right? It was like, everything's back to normal. And so it's the fine print for sure. So I would love to hear from you, Medora, about upskilling, right? We identified in our campaign those three aspects, upskilling for women, childcare, and decent work. And I really wanted to hear from you about what's required. YW Hamilton, where you work, is such an advocate for upskilling and training for women and gender diverse people in the community. What is the advantage and importance of investing in this specific type of training done by an organization like YWCA's who offer these types of programs?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I think it's so important what Armine is talking about in terms of the care economy, and where women have landed historically is in these caring professions and customer service jobs that have been historically underpaid, undervalued. I mean, it's where I work in the human services field, and it's important work, but we are paid less. Our jobs are precarious often in these fields. And of course, some women are more marginalized in these sectors than others. Even in healthcare, which is a growing industry, we continue to see immigrant Black women, women of color in the lowest paid and most precarious types of work. So in our YWCA Hamilton, working with YWCAs across Southern Ontario and Eastern Ontario, we're really thinking about those non-traditional occupations. We've been thinking about that pre-pandemic. We've been working in this area for a long time in upskilling and reskilling women, but it's kind of caught on a little bit. We think the message needs to be out there more, that there are opportunities for women to build economic independence and have greater opportunity if we can open up the sectors that have been traditionally male dominated. And those are the fields that have the high demand jobs. They're the jobs that are available today. They're the jobs with future growth. And there's just so many more possibilities there. And that's in the tech fields, STEM, advanced manufacturing, and trades. And that's where we're focusing our attention right now. And so in those sectors, we also know that the absence of women has not been a benefit to those sectors. So bringing in more women, improving the diversity in those sectors will actually create greater knowledge development, and then also have the opportunity to benefit changing work culture in those areas. And so we can't just tell women, you know, here, there's jobs here, come here, get new skills, open up back at, you know, our traditional learning institutions doors and say, hey, here's some seats for women, come on in, because that's not going to work. And that's been the approach historically. That has been the traditional approach. Oh, we want women in? We'll just tell women that we're open. And these learning environments and these employment places have been designed from a patriarchal structure from within male-dominated sectors. They haven't been inviting and invitational and supportive of women, and women opt out. So they either don't enter, or they enter and they don't graduate, or they go into the job sector and they leave because there's no place for them. And so what women's organizations like YWCA does is create and set up initially the environment, the learning environment, the spaces that are needed to support women, and build the kind of relationships and address the barriers that women are going to face. So women are going to face barriers working in male-dominated sectors. And so what we do is talk about what are those barriers? What are the tools you can access? And giving women a network of other women, mentors, so women who are already in those fields, or other women peers who are also trying to get in the fields where they can go back to and get support from, right? And then we can actually influence and potentially change. But we have to also recognize that there's an analysis and also a design to learning that has to happen to create space for women to learn, because women are being left out through, you know, math, engineering, technology, all of this stuff. We've been diverted out early in our learning. And so we have to take time to upskill and reskill and convince women that they actually belong in these spaces and that they have the skills and the knowledge and build their confidence. And so that's what women's organizations like ours do. We actually have great success, but it takes time and investment, you know, and there's a correlation between childcare too, and the option of accessing these opportunities. Without childcare, you can't upskill, train women, or get women into new employment. So there's a connection here. None of these are threads hang alone. And so that's the focus of our work. But what's been lacking historically is the investment from government in these kinds of training programs. How they've been funded, when they get funded, first of all, for women, they may not even be led by women's organizations. So that's a problem. The design and implementation and the construction and what, you know, understanding of it hasn't been designed by women's organizations. And then when we do get money that is for us, it's very little, it's totally inadequate, and it's brief funding. So it's like, here, let's just go do something, put in a pre-apprenticeship program for 8 months and get your job done, and out you go. And then we have to
reapply. Yes.
Yeah,
yeah,
and guess what we're doing? We're hiring people in part-time precarious work to work in those positions. So we can't even get, you know, grounded and get, you know, that long-term continuum of supports and all the structures we need in place to really make this work. So investment in upskilling and training programs is so critical to the economic recovery and to long-term solutions. And no, we do not want to go back to normal or the way things were. We're done.
Yeah, we're done. We're done. That's the other like subtitle of this campaign. We're done with your sort of idea of normal. And you mentioned childcare, which is so important, is the other one of the 3 planks of this campaign. There's no she-covery without it. And like Armine talked about it being sort of that like stopgap, right? Or both of you. So Carolyn is such a fierce advocate too for childcare in this province. We have the federal Liberals back in power as of September 20th. A lot of bilateral agreements signed all over the country, not in Ontario though. So my question to you is a very simple one. Why not? What is going on? What can you tell us about the importance of childcare for this recovery, but also this long run?
Yeah. So yeah, why does Ontario not have a childcare agreement? That is the $10.2 billion question. Because, you know, the federal government has laid out a plan for a Canada-wide childcare strategy. 8 provinces and territories have signed on with no great difficulty, and those are provincial government, territorial governments of every political stripe. You know, the NDP government in BC was the first to sign on, but we've got Conservative governments in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Prince Edward Island that all signed on as well with no problem, and easy to commit to the principles that the federal government has laid out. The 3 provinces that are left, Alberta, New Brunswick, and Ontario, all Conservative governments, and seeming to be trying to make a wedge issue out of this to try to make this into an issue about childcare. For a while, it didn't seem that way. It seemed like they were, you know, saying we're still negotiating, we're at the negotiating table, which hopefully is still the case. The federal government's been reelected. They're in a stronger position now with a fresh mandate to go into there and say, go to those tables and say, you know, here's the childcare plan and we need you to get on board. But, you know, unfortunately, when it comes to the Ford government, we're talking about a government that has never prioritized childcare. You know, one of the first things they did was cancel free preschool childcare program when they were elected. And through their 4 years in power, they've tried to cut childcare funding. Their recent throne speech didn't even mention the words childcare, didn't even mention the words education. So it's never been a priority for them. But what they are not ready for, I think what they have missed in thinking that they can, you know, not sign on to this or that they cannot prioritize childcare, is that it's going to start to, and it has started, to really impact families in all over Ontario. You know, it used to be, we would talk about childcare, you know, there were wait lists to the highest fees in the country here in Toronto. It's not just here in Toronto, it's all over Ontario, and it's families in places that the Ford Conservatives need votes in the next election, and they haven't gambled on that. In the last 2 weeks alone, we've seen reports, you know, saying that in Grey County, there are wait lists for childcare. Why? Because there's a workforce crisis. Childcare centers are not back at capacity because early childhood educators and childcare workers are so underpaid, and their work has now been made more difficult, that they're no longer putting up with it. And I think that, you know, the Ford government's calculation that the nice ladies of childcare are just going to keep doing this, you know, even if you make their work harder, if you take away the things that brought them joy in their job and replace them with cleaning and screening all the time, you don't pay them anymore, you know, and that they're just going to continue to do that. It's not the case anymore. And it's going to impact parents. Parents are going to be speaking up about it. They already are. And, you know, we need childcare for our recovery. There's no way around it. So, you know, why hasn't it happened? I think, you know, pure politics. The Ford government can try to say they're not getting a fair shake, but it's just delays and distractions. And at the end of the day, they're going to have to get to the table. They're going into an election year, and we're going to have to see them sign on. So then we're going to have $10 billion for childcare, more than doubling Ontario's childcare budget. The next question is, you know, signing an agreement is step one. The question is, what's the Ford government's plan for what to do with that? And that's where things really get scary, because, you know, they need a plan to do it. So the childcare community has a plan. We have a roadmap to universal childcare in Ontario. And it's going to take maximum effort, I think, from, you know, the regular childcare advocates, many of whom are burned out. So our allies and partners as well, to say, you know, we need this plan underway, because there is no recovery without childcare.
Absolutely. And thank you for that. I mean, you also tied in these other elements of this campaign, right? You know, decent work and certainly how this is impacting the entire province. And that's why I wanted to really hear too from you, Laura. You represent a community, you're from a community in a rural area of Ontario, Muskoka. And certainly you mentioned Grey County, Carolyn, when you're talking about the parents that you're hearing from, whether it's childcare or access to employment or decent work conditions, what are you seeing and hearing in your local community, Laura, around how the She-cession is continuing to reverberate and impact people's lives from day to day?
So right now here in Muskoka, there's a really concerted effort to try to help employers fill in positions in their local businesses. They can't seem to find employees to fill their positions, especially minimum wage jobs. And so our YW team has been running women in business programs for many years. So of course, we launched employment readiness programs, one-on-one job coaching, all to help women get back into the workforce again. And what we've seen over the last few months, I think can really help shed some light as to why women are not able to get back into the workforce right now. So on a really grassroots level, we've seen that there's, the barriers that existed before are still very much in place, childcare being one of them. Here in Muskoka, we rely really heavily on home-based licensed childcare providers, and the district tells us that we had just over 30 of those, and now we have 5. So, women, if they don't have anyone to watch their children, they can't go to work now. We also have some unique barriers like access to internet in rural regions. And I'm not talking about living way out, half an hour outside of Bracebridge. I'm talking about people that live 10 minutes outside of the heart of Huntsville or Bracebridge or Gravenhurst who don't have reliable internet. And the other big one is that we don't have robust transportation systems here in rural areas. So, our program facilitator said, she'll say, if women can't even come to our employment programs because of these barriers, how are they gonna, go out to work and access jobs? So those are really important things to highlight, I think. And the other thing that our team has really has become very, very clear over the last year or so is just when we talk about accessing decent work and quality work, accessing decent wages. And the Ontario Living Wage Network has released calculations for regions across Ontario. So for those who may not know what a living wage is, basically they calculate all the basic costs that it costs to just live your life. So, childcare, food, housing, all of those very basic things. And for Muskoka, our living wage is actually $18.55 an hour. That's what it costs to live here. And that's based on a 40-hour work week. So, and just to broaden that out a little bit, we also have reports that tell us that in Simcoe, Muskoka, somebody working in a minimum wage position has not working full-time hours year-round, has not been able to afford a 1-bedroom apartment or even a bachelor unit since 1991. And we also know that in Muskoka, 75% of single parent families are headed by women. So when you put all of this together, if women aren't able to get to work, and then when they can get to work, they can't even access a living wage that allows, especially single parents, that allows them to afford a 1-bedroom apartment. These are really big barriers that need to be addressed and talked about when we talk about getting women back to work and economic recovery, I think.
Okay.
Roz, are you there? Sarah's having an issue again.
Are we having technical issues again?
Yes.
I shouldn't have clapped.
Just don't mute yourself, Sarah.
I won't now.
Okay, you're back.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, it says I'm muted still. Anyway, thank you, Laura.
Bye,
no, I'm so glad you mentioned wages too. I mean, we just saw the increase to $15 minimum wage as of January this coming year. But you just identified how $18 an hour is what you need to live in Muskoka. So there's a disconnect clearly. I want to bring it back to Armine to just sort of talk about that decent work aspect quickly. A lot of the jobs that really got us through the pandemic were care work, right? Work that has historically been undervalued and underappreciated and underpaid. And we are seeing decent work come up a little bit more as a conversation. Really putting a critical eye to some of these decisions that are being made in the halls of power. So what is your analysis of the care economy and COVID told you about what needs to change on this front?
I still am loving reading the captioning because I've now become Armine.
Sorry about the captioning.
Loving it. It's greatly entertaining. The care economy before the pandemic hit accounted for more than 12% of GDP and 1 out of 5 jobs. It is a powerhouse economically speaking. I'm not talking about the unpaid part of care. I'm just talking about the part that's transacted in the formal economy. So we think about it as a kind of nice to have. Oh, the care economy, isn't it soft and fluffy? It's like the driver of the economy. It's the foundation, as you've been hearing, it's the foundation for letting other people do the so-called economy requires care at the foundation. We need 2 things for the so-called economy and our fetishization of growth to happen. We need a planet that functions, and we need a care economy. And the care economy comes both in paid and unpaid flavors. On the paid side, if every job was a good job in the care economy, you would have the middle class of the early 21st century, just as manufacturing was the backbone for the middle class in the 50s to the 70s. So we have sitting right in front of us the chance to actually create a better world for everybody, where we are caring for the provider as much as we are caring for the person receiving the care. We're making sure that those jobs are not undervalued. You know, there are places where you need a license to groom a dog, but you don't need a license to take care of a preschooler or a frail old person. Like we've got our priorities messed up. So yes, let's upskill people into male-dominated professions that pay better, but let's also make sure that the female-dominated professions that have been so undervalued for so long, because as Carolyn says, the nice ladies that provide childcare are getting a little bit, seared. They're not just burnt out, they're like darkened by the heat of what's going on. I was just shocked by what Laura said about going from 30 licensed home-based care centers to 5. We don't have that data to say what are the bottlenecks in the system. And I guess if we put a focus on making sure we've got what we need to get to our job and stay at our job so that people can maximize their potential of whatever the economy is, we are meeting a conservative goal as much as a liberal goal, as much as a progressive goal. Is like, let's maximize potential, because everybody wants, more independence, more stuff. And the only way you do that is if you make sure you've got taken care of the basics. So I will finish by saying decent work has to be at the heart of everything we're talking about. The pandemic has led to a different version of what was happening before the pandemic. When people talked about the future of work, they opened door number 1, the robots are going to eat all of the jobs. What we need is the basic income. First of all, that's like insane folly. And we will have a different conversation about that down the road. But there's work that needs to be done that is systemically undervalued. And no, a basic income will not address the fact that the people doing the work that will pay for the basic income for somebody else are themselves unable to have a decent living. Okay. So we have 2 or 3 things to do. We need to make sure that that decent work involves living wages and benefits. By the way, if you could either do it through a living wage, which requires calculations in every jurisdiction, or you could simply anchor the minimum wage to the average wage. If you did that, you'd be over $18 an hour in Ontario right now. We don't have a reason for $15 an hour. We didn't have a reason for $14.35. These are numbers that are being plucked out of the sky. We need to talk about the minimum wage in relationship to how all work gets done. That means the average wage. It means including the wages of the people in the C-suites and the managers. It means everybody plays a role in bringing us what we consume. And so the legal minimum you pay to the least paid person has to be in relationship to everybody else. So I think we should be all pushing for 60% of the average wage is the legal minimum wage, and it's always tied to that. it's not adjusted by inflation. It's adjusted by this relationship to all other workers at all times. And that will get us closer to a living wage, but formulaically, instead of applying it to every jurisdiction where we live, number one. Number two, it's not just wages, it's also benefits. Who gets protections under employment standards? Who is deemed and classified a self-employed worker versus an employee? Who is getting the runaround through temp agencies? And who gets labor protections and who can enforce those labor protections and employment standards? Number three, we need better housing, we need better internet, we need better childcare. So we need to decommodify some of the basics that we all need to survive. That to me is the trinity of how we move forward, and it is all based on decent work for every worker, every job a good job.
Absolutely. I love that you had those 3 points. A trinity, right? We're still in our like biblical thing that the captains were bringing up earlier. So we've heard from you, Armine. Thank you for that. What do the others think? What do the rest of you think about what needs to be done to achieve a she-covery in Ontario? Like if there's like one thing that's on your mind, could be related to what you just spoke about earlier, but just quickly, what is the thing that needs to happen to make things better?
Well,
throwing it out there.
Obviously, for me and from my perspective, it's childcare, right? And Armine has put that out there. It was the song of the summer last year. There's no recovery without a she-covery and no she-covery without childcare. And it's so I managed not to mangle any of the words, but it's so essential because we're seeing it all the time, and parents are and women are bearing the brunt of it, unable to access childcare. They're trying to get, people are starting to head, people who've been working at home are starting to have to go back to the office. And you can't do that without childcare. You can't work at home, frankly, without childcare. That's come to be known. If you've got a toddler on your head, you can't do your job. And of course, people who have been struggling this entire time, essential workers who have been going to work every day, but unable to access childcare, that has been a huge challenge for them, trying to juggle, having to patch together unregulated, inadequate childcare arrangements.
And
that's
sorry,
not the way forward, and that's drives people, to drop out of the workforce, right? Yeah. And it's not a choice if you have to be home looking after your child. That's not we can't call that just a choice if it's because you don't have adequate childcare. For people who are working in early learning and childcare, decent work can't come soon enough. Mm-hmm. It's this workforce crisis in childcare that advocates have talked about for years. It's like this steam train that we've seen coming, and tried to warn government about again and again, and the pandemic has just accelerated it. Mm-hmm. And now it's finally starting to impact programs. Childcare centers are closing rooms. I was visiting a childcare center in North York, surrounded by apartment towers, families everywhere who need childcare. We were standing in a preschool room that should have been serving 30 children and was closed because they could not hire the staff. Yep. So if that's the state of things, it's so clear that we need to, we can't wait another day to sign the childcare agreement. It needs to happen now. It needed to happen months ago. And if we want to be serious about a social and economic recovery, it needs to happen right now.
Yeah, well said. And so also like sort of what needs to change, but also is there something that's actually like a real roadblock as well to achieving this she-covery? Medora, Laura?
Yeah, well, I think one of the other pieces, I don't think this is the key roadblock, but I think one of the pieces that, our campaign is talking about too is investing in women's organizations. This has been a problem historically. We have been calling out these issues. We've been well aware of the problems for a long time and talking about them. This isn't new information to us. The pandemic shone a light on some of it, profiled some of the issues we've been talking about for years. But one of the challenges is, as women's organizations, we're funded through a charity model. We're not seen as a critical piece to the economy. We're not seen as contributing tremendous benefit to our our communities except through, unless we can use a charity model and fundraise. And we have to fundraise for a large percentage of our operations in order to continue. And that doesn't make sense. And that's just an important signal and sign of how we devalue women, is also how we devalue women's organizations. And so that, for me, has to fundamentally change as well, as part of this recovery process.
Mm-hmm. Laura, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was, it's such a big question. And I think for me, my thing is that I think it's the understanding that women's issues don't live over here in a silo. It's not, it's not a nice to have. It's not like a feel good investment. Even before the pandemic, there was a strong economic case to invest in women, because we know that when women thrive, they bring their families along, they bring their communities along. And so communities thrive socially and economically. And we often advocate to our local leaders that if we want to find customized solutions to our community problems, we really need to break down who those problems are affecting the most and in what ways. And so we encourage them to put a gendered lens on things. And we find that more often than not, women are disproportionately affected. So if we want to solve economic problems, you need to lift up women, because they're often the ones that are the key to the recovery and solutions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, we struggle with that for sure as YWs, as Medora put forward. I want to ask a very simple question to all of you, or whoever wants to answer. What are you afraid of if we don't actually get a plan or make strides on addressing the she-covery? If, or even just kind of like if we go back to this normal, when we do have these opportunities, having seen the impacts that the pandemic has brought, coming out the other side, what are you worried about? What's at stake?
I think immediately there's some, Carolyn hit on closing our childcare doors. There's also other programs. Armine talked about housing and as a key to basic needs. Encampments are growing, people on the streets. And to be quite honest with you, we can't find people to work in our homeless sector either, or in our housing support sector. And so we risk actually some of these fundamental key pieces that have been keeping things at bay for a long time are going to be lost. We're not going to find, we're going to be starting to close our doors and close the essential programs that have been critical to communities, but have been undervalued and underinvested in.
Anybody else? What's at stake, Laura?
I'll say for our rural region, it's that the gap between men and women economically will continue to grow. Before the pandemic, in our trades and tourism economy, women dominated all of the jobs that paid under $40,000 a year. And we also saw that a man in Muskoka with no higher education, including high school, made on average $7,000 more than a woman who had a college education, which is a really scary fact. And that's from Statistics Canada. So I think that's my biggest fear.
Yeah. Carolyn, Armine, what's keeping you up at night on this stuff?
Well, I feel like with childcare, we're in this, we're at this real crux point, right? Where the flag went up and many more people started to understand how important childcare was going to be to recovering from the pandemic. And we got the attention of the business community, and the chambers of commerce are on board with this now, and the federal government's on board with this. But we have still, we have this, the Ford government that doesn't want to move on it. And if we can't push them to, then the childcare sector is at a brink. In truth, right? Like, we're needing to invest more to get things moving, to shore things up, and then to improve them. But we're at a stage where if that doesn't happen, it starts to crumble. It's really at that crunch point. And if that happens, I fear that you know, then you know, we hear those things that we've heard year after year that, you know, it's just not possible. You know, a national childcare program just can't happen. And what happens to that public conversation that we were having, it goes back to being the private conversation. The childcare crisis for years was a silent crisis because it relied on women, it relied on mothers and educators to feel that it was their private crisis alone. So that's what I'm worried about, and that's what we cannot allow to happen. We have to keep this public conversation happen. We have to keep it a public crisis, and we have to keep it a political crisis, because it is within the power of our provincial government to solve this crisis. If they continue to ignore it, we cannot let them ignore it, right? And I think that's the conversation that we have to just keep pushing forward.
Yeah. Armine, one last, do you have any thoughts on that, or we want to go to questions quickly after this?
I think I'm Armenian, so it's really easy to see disaster around every corner. And I think it is very easy for us to go back to so-called normal, the opposite of the woke state that everybody loves to hate, where we realize what is potentially possible. You know, the world that we could have is literally right in front of us. To Carolyn's point, a government that works in this direction can deliver it with almost no effort at all, if that's what it wants to do, which is why it's really important that you're doing this campaign at the beginning of the 6-month window that is going to lead to whoever it is that governs us. Governments are us. So we're going to have to convince our neighbors to vote for the ideas that we think are going to take us to the place where we would like to go to. But it is absolutely possible to see how labor shortages that were emerging before the pandemic hit, that the pandemic poured accelerant on, will lead to greater demand by businesses because of the tourism story that has been told in Northern Ontario, because of restaurants in downtown Toronto being unable to find people to serve our patrons, that there will be a real demand for migrant work, so that there will be a real influx of people, businesses demanding an immigration. Yeah, a nation built on immigrants becomes a nation's economy built on migrant workers, which is not a society. It is a barely functioning Ponzi scheme of economics. So that's what I worry about, because that will erode the floor for everybody. Whereas the actual macro moment we are in lays out the foundation for making literally every job a good job, because we are moving from 40 years of labor surpluses, thank you boomers, of which I am one, to about 25 years of labor shortages. This isn't something that the pandemic created. This isn't a supply chain issue, that's part of it. There is something very fundamental that's shifting throughout the global north, and we have the opportunity to translate that challenge into something actually better, but we do need our governments seizing that opportunity. We can't do it just through the private sector. I wrote a column about the potential for disaster, the potential for slow growth, and the potential for an economic renaissance in my, not today's column, but my last column. And I want us to think very seriously about the potential for economic renaissance that sits right in front of us. So it's really easy to think about what keeps you up at night that could go wrong, but I think that's the wrong focus. I think we need to relentlessly think about what could go right, and how do we make that happen, and who do we make that happen with? And thank you for starting this campaign that helps us do that across the province.
Thank you, Armine. I mean, I love that idea of an economic renaissance and women being such a part of that, right? There's so much opportunity right in front of us, as you said. So thank you. I mean, we're going to just dive. We only have a few minutes left, but there is a question for sure. One. So Roz is going to ask it, because I can't see them because my Zoom is exploding again. So Roz,
made today work, Sarah. We made it work. We did have a great question in the chat from Pamela Uppal, who's from the Ontario Nonprofit Network. And it actually sort of springs off what you're saying, Armine, about better is possible. And what Pam had asked is, what can we learn from other jurisdictions? Are there other jurisdictions we can look to and say, see, better is possible? And I'll open that up to anyone who has an aha response.
Well, on childcare, certainly we have decades of research, showing what's possible, internationally, as well as in Quebec. what happened when they made childcare affordable and the impact that it had on women's labor force participation, and that the government was getting more back in return from increased taxes than it cost to run the program. So it's, you know, it's so obvious to so many people on childcare, and it's something that we just have to, you know, keep pushing forward.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to piggyback on what Carolyn just said, because there is a quarter century of evidence on how to do better with what we've got. But I do want to broaden it from the childcare sector to the care economy as a whole, and the role women play in it. Like in the three major sectors of the care economy, health, elder care, and childcare, women make up more than 90% of the labor force. And so we play a remarkable role in setting the foundation for everything else that happens. And to Laura's point, no, sorry, not Laura's point, sorry, Medora's point about getting more, you know, the tighter the labor market is, the more we're going to need all hands on deck. So there's a real opportunity to get women into non-traditional jobs also that tend to pay better. Though the minute women start entering into these jobs, the wage disparities don't necessarily disappear. So I think what's going to be really important for us to do as activists and authorities in the fields in which we operate is to understand that the care economy challenges, which are facing the entire global north because of population aging, which cascades over into labor shortages, it cascades over into how do we provide these services that everybody needs. Do we do, like, it's going to grow. The care economy is going to grow from 12% of GDP and 20%, 21% of jobs to something bigger. Is it going to do that through for-profit provision? Is that going to do that through publicly funded provision? Is that going to become affordable? Are the jobs going to be good? Are they going to be bad? This is all the chapter yet to be written. And the reason I'm raising this about the care economy and internationally, do we have examples, is we have got global conversations happening on climate change and on the pandemic. We do not on the care economy. And yet this is a global phenomenon. It's going to have, you know, the giant sucking sound from the global south as we try and bring up enough people to do the work because we're not paying people well enough. Or will we train our own people better and pay them better? Like, these are huge meta narratives that are affecting not just Canada, not just Muskoka, not just Niagara, not just Toronto, not, you know, it's affecting everybody at the same time. So we're all looking over each other's shoulders. How are you doing it? So keep your eyes peeled in the world that you live in, within the care economy, within women's contribution to the overall economy, and say, how are other people doing it? Because this conversation is going to go global, and we need to think globally and act locally and become leaders, not laggards in policy development.
Leaders, not laggards. I love it. Anyone else have anything to add? We have 1 minute left, or should we convene? You're good? Oh, I just want to thank you so much, all of you, for coming to attend, and certainly the panelists, especially for taking time out, and your expertise and your focus on, and your work day in and day out to make sure that women and gender diverse folks, and just the economies that we spoke of, the care economy, you know, are just, you know, advocated for. And this economic renaissance is possible. If we can get some political will happening, we're in good shape. And so please sign our petition. Thank you for following along with the campaign. We're going to keep that petition live, so share it with friends. And we will share this recording as well, too, for folks who want to refer to it in future. So thank you everyone for coming today. We hope you have a great rest of your week. Take care. Thanks.